Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen speaking. This is a video for students of the psychological illusion model, and today's topic is depression. I've been asked by a few people specifically to make a video on how to work with depression and also to do my best to answer the question, do emotions tell us about psychological needs? So I'll do my best to address both questions. If you're just curious about depression and how to work with it, this information will still be very useful to you. Some of it in the end will likely be a bit technical in case you haven't studied my work, but hang in there. So, regards to depression, well, let's start with the whole idea of, do emotions tell us about human needs? I'm very skeptical about the whole idea of psychological needs. And I'm also kind of skeptical about the idea that our emotions tell us about needs. I think it's way more likely that the emotional state that you're in, the psychophysiological state that you're in the moment, makes it look as if you have particular psychological needs. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this. So let's say that you experience what you might call boredom. Let's say that you're just bored, right? So when you're in a state of boredom, it might look as if you need stimulation, and that something needs to happen and that you have to go do something else to have fun. Like, it looks as if that's your need, and it might even look as if boredom tells you something about the external world. You know, the situation is boring, or the person I'm spending time with is boring, so I have to spend time with someone different, for example. But boredom is a mind state. Boredom is a mind state. It's thought taking form in the moment, meaning boredom tells you that the thought process in the moment has taken the form and shape of boredom. So boredom really tells you about the quality of your attention in the moment. If you're bored, it means that the quality of your attention in the moment is poor and kind of scattered. It means that your concentration powers are not very high in the moment. So boredom, if you look at it this way, is a sign to pay attention. It's a sign that says, look, dude, your concentration powers or your qualities of attention in the moment is a bit fuzzy, is a bit scattered. Sharpen up your attention. So this is something you'll discover if you meditate. If you meditate over time and you have a meditation practice, you can meditate on boredom. And like, if you really pay attention to the sensations, to the experience that you label boredom, it's extremely fascinating. Like, there's so much stuff to discover, because what looked like boredom looks very, very different when you start to really look at boredom and see what's actually there. You could, for example, in meditation, study the most, I'll put in quotation marks, boring object in the world, the breath. I mean, but what we call the breath, the breath is a concept, right? So it makes it seem as if the breath is a thing. But the breath actually refers to a bunch of processes, a bunch of dynamic processes that are vibrating and pulsating and flicking on and flicking off, right? So you can discover a whole new world by really paying attention to breathing. The most boring object in the world is actually the gateway to discovering profound truths about psychological and spiritual experience. So this is one reason why I'm skeptical about the claim that our emotions tell us about the world or even tell us about so-called psychological needs. Now, having said this, of course, we human beings have certain tendencies, we have certain orientations. So you can talk about needs, as in hunger and sleep and rest, and a few other things. But when you move to the psychological realm, so much of our experience is illusory and based in misunderstandings that what it looks like we need is largely dependent upon, the mind state that we're in, our level of insight, and our level of thought recognition. So I'll give you a couple of other examples. I worked with a client recently, a young man who wanted to be a police officer, but who couldn't because he had a severe stuttering problem, which made it very difficult to even have a normal conversation. So I worked with him first session, and I helped him discover something magical, and that is that as long as you breathe, you don't stutter. If you hold your breath, you stutter. So I helped him make the discovery, and I helped him, become mindful of his breathing in such a way that he could breathe fluently. And he discovered that as long as he used his concentration, he could have a fluent conversation with me in the office. So I talked to him a little bit about the nature of thought, and mind states and stuff like that. And I said, let's, because he had this intense fear of, we don't really have fear of stuff, but he had this fear of social situations, of having a conversation with someone. So I said, let's go have a conversation with someone. I'm going to take you to speak to my wife and my mother-in-law. If you survive those, you'll be cool. The crooks will be no problem. So, young man took him out into my car, and we started driving, and he looked terrified. Like, he looked like his face was pale. I looked at him and I cracked a smile. I said, you remind me of like Pirates of the Caribbean, in these, these movies where you have these pirates at sea, and someone's like walking the plank, and they're about to be fed to the sharks. And he was like, yeah, that's how I feel. I'm really anxious. And I said to him, I don't care. Neither should you. And this kind of took him back a bit, because most people think that anxiety means something, that anxiety tells them something about the world, or about what they can do, or who they are, or who other people are. And that's how they get stuck into these ruminative loops, because it looks as if it's significant. It looks as if it has a message. And anxiety just tells you that right now the thinking process has taken an anxious form, an anxious shape. It's a thought barometer in the moment. It doesn't tell you anything about anything. But here's the key point. When you're in that anxious state, it's going to look as if you need to get out of the situation. It's going to look as if you need security, or that you need guarantees that people will like you and that you'll get approved, or that you need a guarantee that you won't make a fool of yourself. It's going to look as if you have these needs. But that's completely dependent upon that particular mind state and of misunderstanding the nature of that mind state. So I said to him, look, it doesn't really matter what you feel. If you breathe, you'll speak. If you don't breathe, you'll stutter. I'll remind you when we do the conversation. So we went in, and first he had this long conversation with my wife, and it was a major moment. Like, it's one of those things that makes this job, at least for me, the coolest one in the world. He had the most fluent conversation he had had in his entire life. And then he had another long conversation with my mother-in-law, and he repeated it. He had another most fluent conversation of his entire life. And he was, this is fantastic. This is completely fantastic. And I said, yes, and there's something else for you to discover about anxiety and the nature of thought, and that is, look, you were terrified. It's like you have this severe anxious feeling when we were in the car. You weren't even in a conversation. You were thinking. And what did that anxious feeling in the car, like, was there anything in that anxious feeling in the car that told you anything about the fact that you were going to have the most fluent conversation ever in about 5 minutes? And he was like, no. It's like he realized there was absolutely nothing in that feeling to tell him anything whatsoever about the future, anything whatsoever about the conversation that he was just about to have. And of course, he discovered that none of the needs for security and safety and approval that he thought that he had were really needs at all. These were just thoughts associated with a particular state. Now, the state is also thought in that sense. I'll give you another example. I work with a somewhat depressed client. He had cancer. He'd had a remission. And the reason he came to see me was because he was a bit psychologically oriented, and he had this fear that certain psychological factors had been at play in the development of the cancer that he had, and he had this hunch that, I may be well, but if I don't deal with this, that might increase the chances of me developing the cancer again. And that's actually good thinking. That's actually good thinking, because the emotion was one of hopelessness, a tendency towards depression and a tendency towards hopelessness. And that is a risk factor that's okay to deal with. Now, but he thought that the feelings of hopelessness told him something about himself, that he, at his core, had this personality tendency of being prone to viewing the world in a hopeless way. So this is like a core essence of my personality or who I am. By the way, this is very typical for people who engage in the process that we label depression. It's this personalizing these types of things. And he had a tendency to irritate himself a lot about, or protect his confidentiality. So he had a tendency, let's just say that he had a tendency to do a lot of irritation and hopelessness around the stupidity and irrationality of certain members of society and certain people that he knew and certain people at work. Now, what he would do was that he would kind of psychologically enter their world, so to speak, and demand that they be rational, demand that they be wise, demand that they have the capacity to be less egotistical and to see more of the larger picture. And when the world didn't comply, he would get a feeling of hopelessness. Now, my job was to help him to see that, look, the feeling of hopelessness is a thought barometer more than anything else. It's not a barometer of the world per se or your life. It's a barometer in the moment that tells you about the quality of your thinking. So it tells you that right now your thought process has taken a hopeless form, that you have some kind of hopeless thinking. Because here's what he discovered. He discovered that by playing dictator, meaning by demanding that other people be rational and that they be intelligent and that they be wise, that they had to see certain things which they had a tendency not to see, and to then blame those people for the irritation that he felt, that is hopeless thinking. Like, that's pretty good feedback, that to organize your experience in such a way that other people in the world need to be a particular way for you to have peace on the inside, it's a hopeless project. And in this sense, the feeling of hopelessness was a good friend. It was a good friend to alert him that, hey, dude, you're in other people's business, making demands about what they have to understand and what they have to see and how they have to be, and making your own well-being completely dependent upon that. That's hopeless. So once he started to get that the feelings of hopelessness was not a barometer of other people in the world and life per se, but it was a barometer in the moment that right now he was playing dictator and having demands psychologically on behalf of other people and then making him responsible for his emotional states, i.e. the world and other people have to change for me to feel better. That's hopeless. Like, you should have a feeling of hopelessness if you're engaging with that, because like it's a really, really hopeless project. And the more he started to see that, oh my God, this is thought, and this is actually a pretty good barometer to alert me to say that, look, right now my thinking's kind of going into hopeless will. You know, do you want to engage in this? Do you want to cultivate this, or do you want to kind of take a step back? It became a friend. It became a useful guide. So, but from the state of hopelessness, it looked as if he had particular needs that other people needed to be a particular way for his own internal experience to be a particular way. So one thing that's very useful to notice here is that any emotional state, any mood, will function as a reality tunnel, meaning that if you're in an anxious state, your mind is looking for reasons to panic. So it's not that much that the world per se is scary. It's more that if your thought process takes an anxious shape or form, then whatever you think about is going to look scary, whether it's finances or health or relationship or whatever it might be. And when we then say, because my health is like this, that's why I'm anxious, that's kind of completely misunderstanding what's going on. It's kind of completely misunderstanding what's going on. So what I also notice is that this tendency to think that because we want something, that because we prefer something, that because we like something, we need it. It must be that way. You know, it really should happen. This is the express train for anxiety and anger issues and what's called depression and so on and so forth. It's this tendency of taking an idea, I want this, or I'd like this, or I hope this doesn't happen, or I hope people don't think of me that way, or I hope this is going to turn out well, or whatever it might be. It's taking that idea and then turning it into this must that says that, I must be that way, or I have to have these things, or I need that approval, or the world has to be a fair place. I need to know there's not going to be a nuclear war, or, whatever the particular concern might be. That's very often the root of depression. And if you look at, for example, a lot of the epidemic of like young men who end up severely depressed and kill themselves, if you look at a lot of these people, a lot of them have very perfectionistic, absolutistic thinking, where they have all these ideas of how successful they should be, and how much money they should earn, and how easy life should be, and how wise other people should be, and how the world should be, and then they turn those into demands and musts. I'm 25, I should have accomplished this, and because I haven't, that's completely horrible, and it means that I'm a loser. That's very often how people end up in many of these kind of depressive and hopeless states to begin with. So what I very often do with my clients is I help them discover their musts, discover their shoulds, discover their perceived needs. And then once they know what they are, I help them challenge those ideas. Like, okay, so my daughter must listen to me. Must she? Is there any law in the universe that says that kids have to listen to their parents? Or I need to know that my presentation next week's going to go well. Well, it would be nice if it goes well, but is it really true that I need that guarantee? The more you, like, if you can see that the fact that you feel these stressful feelings is often an indication that you're engaging in that type of masturbatory thinking, and you can start to ask yourself, what am I demanding here? And making it visible and kind of, challenging it, that often kind of, chops the head of the snake off at the roots. And you get to see it for what it is. Now, as I said previously, I don't mean to imply that any of us can completely escape the world that we live in. I mean, if you look at the babies in the Romanian orphanages, who were never touched, most of these, from what I've read, have ended up retarded, with severe cognitive impairments. So, I mean, we are social beings. You could probably say that, we have some need for, friendship and companionship and stuff like that. Might be fair enough. But is it really true that you need that particular person to love you? Or that you need the approval and respect of that particular person or that particular group? Like, if you get kind of specific around it, you'll get the chance to see that for the most part, or exclusively all the way, what we call needs is just thought, and it's way more a reflection of a temporary state than anything else. Like, even, I mean, it's accurate to say that human beings need sleep. I mean, I don't know anyone who functions without any sleep. So it's accurate to say that human beings need sleep. But if you get specific, almost everyone I've ever worked with for sleep issues have been lying in bed demanding that I must sleep. I have to relax. If I don't go to sleep now, I'll be drained in the morning. And they engage in this masturbatory thinking where they're demanding that they must sleep and that they must relax, and of course then they notice that they're not asleep and they're not relaxed, and they get really, really stressed, right? So by helping these people to understand that mechanism and to see that it's thought generated, and to make the demand visible and look at it and go, okay, I'd really like to go to sleep now, but is it really true that I have to? Even if the brain kind of screams back, yeah, fuck you, I have to go to sleep. Even if you get that type of response, just the fact that you ask the question kind of forces your brain to evaluate it. And way more often than not, these clients have started relaxing and gotten over their insomnia. So again, this is a tricky. One person on the Psychological Illusion forum asked me about loneliness. Does the loneliness tell me about my need for, well, the feeling of, again, back to the Romanian orphanages, or looking at what tends to happen to people in isolation in prison. Even though you have a lot of long-term meditators who have spent long time in isolation and have been extremely healthy. So, but we are social animals. Companionship, love, friendships, a sex life, good hobbies, these things seem to kind of evoke health in us, so to speak, and to be good. But so there's something to it in terms of us being social beings. But again, loneliness is also a mind state. Like, you can be lonely in a crowd. You can spend time alone. Like, for example, my tendencies, I'm not very sociable. I've always been something of a loner, just in terms of tendencies. I really like solitude. So what for one person might be loneliness might for another person just be solitude. And I love the stillness and the time for myself. So again, if you're in a state of anxiety, if you're in a state of depression, for example, if you're hurting inside, it may look like you need people, or that you need a particular approval, or that you need a particular companionship. The question is, does it still look that way when the mind clears? That's something to kind of look at. And here's the funny part. A lot of the time when people are lonely, they're not at home with themselves, meaning they're a bit like the insomnia clients. They're in their head thinking of what they're missing and how life should be, and all these things, and they're feeling those thoughts. And you could make a good argument that well, there's no one home. Like they're not present with their own experience. It's a bit like boredom. If you're really present with boredom, it's immensely fascinating. Try as an experiment to meditate on loneliness, because what you call loneliness is processes. It's a bunch of processes of images and body sensations, dialogue, and attempt to be completely present with your experience and see if the loneliness is actually there. See if you can actually find it. It's a really interesting thing to do. And here's the funny part. When it's no longer there, in that sense, you may still socialize and go do things with other people and have conversations and make love or whatever you do, or play in a band, but it's more likely to not be the result of escaping loneliness and getting something from someone out there, but more a result of life just flowing, life just emerging. But again, none of this says that, it might not be a good idea to be more social, or to get more engaged, or to do things. I mean, even, one thing when working with what people call depression is, if you work with someone who says that they're angry and you ask them, what is it that you call anger, or same with anxiety, it often sounds pretty similar from client to client. The word depression is a bit more, people may be referring to quite different processes. Someone may primarily be very irritable. Other people may be very fatigued. Other people might just feel very empty in a sense. But again, let's say that someone's fatigued. Do we humans have unlimited energy reserves? No. I mean, if you've done a long day's work, or you've done a lot of rumination and you're really tired, solution to that is sleep. So I mean, sometimes feelings of fatigue and feeling of sluggishness and stuff like that may be a good signal to take a rest, but usually only acutely. Usually only acutely. It's way more often, again, a barometer that tells you that you have a lot of busy thinking, a lot of rumination going on. And it's a signal, it's got your inner GPS saying, look, this isn't going anywhere. Don't attempt to think yourself out of this, or to engage in this thinking. Keep the back door open of the house, keep the front door open, let the thoughts come and go. Just don't serve them tea. Just don't invest in them. Don't give them any attention. They'll just come and they'll go. And once that kind of, once that stuff kind of dissipates, people often discover that, they're quite energized. I've had people come into my office fatigued, leaving feeling very calm, very peaceful, very rejuvenated. So the feeling of fatigue, again, if you go back to human needs, it may look like the feeling is telling you that you need to rest, or that you need to be in bed, or that everything's hopeless and that you really shouldn't be doing anything. Probably not. Probably not. It's just that as long as you're in that state, it's going to look that way. And it's going to look as if you have those needs. But if you work with people who depress, if you get them active, and you get them, because often they isolate themselves and they stop doing things, and if you can break that cycle, get them to exercise again, get them to socialize, get them to do stuff, they often discover that, I thought I was so fatigued I couldn't do anything, but I started walking or I started running, and then the energy level kind of picked up, and afterwards they feel fantastic. So all athletes discover this, or all authors or all professionals in any field discover it, at least as a domain-specific insight, that, if you're an athlete, some mornings you may not want to run or write on your book or whatever, but you also know that as soon as you get going, you'll get into that flow state and things will begin to move. Sometimes, I usually love my work, but sometimes before a session, I have a thought that I'd wish I'd be somewhere else and do something different. But I know that feeling just tells me that my concentration powers are a bit off. And as soon as the client comes in the door and I focus in, that vanishes, and most of the time we have a great session. So feeling doesn't really tell you much about that. That is a really, really interesting thing to look at. Now, for students of the psychological illusion model who have asked, how do you do, for example, name it, find it, self-inquiry, basically, for depression? Well, get specific. I mean, is it hopelessness? Is it like, so let's say that the client says, I'm so depressed. I've had this grave injustice in my life. Something happened to me. Someone sent me to, someone did something horrible to me or whatever it was, Well, because of this injustice, I have these feelings, right? So what you then want to do is you want to say, look, if the injustice is there, like if the injustice actually exists at the level of experience, we should be able to find it. So you start looking for the injustice. You might start with the sentence. This horrible thing that happened to me. Take a look at that sentence. Is that sentence in and of itself the injustice? Well, does the person respond? Yes. If the person doesn't respond, no. Again, this won't make sense to you if you haven't studied with me. But for those who have, or let's say that the person says that they're so depressed because of a betrayal, Well, if the betrayal is actually there, I'm not saying that someone hasn't broken a contract or cheated on them or whatever in the world, but I'm saying at the level of experience, if the betrayal is there in your experience, making you feel this in the moment, because the feelings are thought barometer in the moment, we should be able to find it. The shattered dream, the betrayal, the rotten world, the grave injustice. Look for it. Look for it. There's also something else too, and that is Martin Seligman, a psychologist who used to torture rats and then founded this positive psychology field. He did some research on learned helplessness and depression, and he discovered the 3 Ps, which I think are quite accurate, and that is that people who depress tend to take failures or losses personally, like as in I am a failure, and to kind of make them permanent and pervasive across all contexts. So, for example, a lot of people who do depression may, so when you didn't get that job promotion, what did that seem to reflect back onto you? Well, I'm a failure, I just have this hopeless personality core. Well, in that case, if they are a failure, meaning if there is a self in there which is a failure, you should be able to find it. So you do name it, find it, in the attempt to find the one who's a failure. Also, even just a feeling state of irritability or depression, there's a world of difference between I'm depressed, where it seemed as if this is me, this is who I am identical to this temporary experience, which isn't temporary, it's permanent, it's who I am, versus depression is here, versus irritability is here, fear is in town, as a client said a few weeks ago. You're still acknowledging the experience, but this experience that I am this experience makes it very personal, versus this is weather. Depression's here. Irritability is here. So this is massive to help clients play with this. So when you do name it, find it, what you're looking to help people discover is that there is no it. Like depression seems like an it. There's this hopelessness or depression that's doing something to me, an it. Well, if there is such an it, you should be able to find it. or there is this other, this separate other that's making me feel, my father is making me feel this. Well, I'm not saying that they don't have a father in the world, but if there's a father in their actual experience that's making them feel this, you should be able to find it. Or if there is an I in here that's a loser, then you should be able to find the loser if it's actually there. And of course, what you can help people discover is that there is no it, there is no you, and there is no I. At the level of experience, there's just process. At the level of experience, there's just process. So I hope this was useful. I hope this gave you some food for thought, so to speak. Any insights, any experiences you may have, please do post them in the forum. Till next time, thanks.